The air hung thick with anticipation on that sweltering July evening in 1984, as 90,000 souls pressed together in the colossal bowl of Giant Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. The concrete giant trembled under the weight of expectation, every seat filled, every aisle packed with bodies swaying in the humid summer heat. Street lights flickered to life beyond the stadium walls as darkness settled over the metropolitan sprawl, but inside this cathedral of sound and light, time seemed suspended in that magical space between day and night, between reality and dream. Michael Jackson stood alone on the massive stage, a solitary figure silhouetted against the backdrop of towering speakers and gleaming equipment that stretched toward the stadium's upper reaches. His sequined jacket caught fragments of light from the dormant stage machinery, casting tiny rainbows across the front rows where faces pressed against the barriers, tears already streaming down cheeks before the first note had even sounded. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy mixed with the electric scent of summer storms approaching from the west, creating an atmosphere so charged that even the security guards found themselves unconsciously swaying to rhythms that existed only in their collective imagination. Behind Michael, his band members took their positions with the reverence of priests approaching an altar. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected, longer than comfortable, until even the vendors stopped hawking their wares in the concourses and the ushers found themselves gravitating toward the tunnel openings to catch glimpses of what was unfolding below. In section after section, row after row, children clutched their parents' hands while teenagers held their breath and adults felt their hearts racing with the same intensity they had experienced in their youth when music first made them believe in magic. The opening chords of the concert had been building toward this moment for over 2 hours. Michael had already transformed himself through song after song, each performance more electrifying than the last, each dance move more impossible than physics should allow. Sweat glistened on his face under the hot stage lights, and his voice had taken on that raw, emotional quality that only emerged during his most transcendent performances. The audience had been with him every step of the journey, their voices joining his on every chorus, their bodies moving as one massive organism responding to the rhythm that seemed to emanate from some deeper source than the speakers surrounding them. But nothing had prepared them for what was about to happen. As Michael stepped forward to the edge of the stage, the massive video screens flanking the performance area zoomed in on his face, revealing eyes that seemed to see every individual person in that vast sea of humanity. His breathing was visible through the silk shirt that clung to his chest, and when he raised his hand to shield his eyes from the glare of the spotlights, the gesture was so intimate and vulnerable that a hush fell over the stadium like a blanket settling over a sleeping child. You know, Michael's voice whispered into the microphone, amplified through the sound system until it seemed to come from the sky itself. There's something special about tonight. Something I can feel in the air, in your hearts, in the way you've been singing with me. His words drifted across the stadium floor and up into the nosebleed sections where fans had climbed over seats to get better views, carried on the warm breeze that stirred the flags and banners that declared love for the man standing so small yet so commanding on the stage below. The crowd's response was a wave of sound that started in the front rows and rolled backward through the stadium like thunder, voices calling out, "We love you, Michael," and "Don't stop" in dozens of languages, creating a polyglot prayer that rose into the night sky. Somewhere in the middle sections, a child's voice cut through the noise with startling clarity, singing a few bars of melody that seemed to hang in the air even after the little voice had been swallowed back in the crowd's roar. Michael's head tilted toward the sound, and those who were close enough to see his face later swore they witnessed something shift in his expression, a recognition of something larger than himself, larger than the performance, larger than the carefully choreographed spectacle that had brought them all together in this concrete bowl under the New Jersey stars. His hand moved to his chest, fingers splaying over his heart, and for a moment he simply stood there, absorbing the energy that pulsed between the stage and the stands like electricity seeking ground. "Tonight," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I want to try something different, something we've never done before. The words sent a ripple of excitement through the audience, bodies leaning forward in their seats, voices dropping to urgent whispers as people tried to guess what surprise Michael had planned. The band behind him exchanged glances, clearly unaware of whatever improvisation their leader was about to attempt. Michael walked to the center of the stage, his movements fluid and purposeful despite the exhaustion that must have been settling into his bones after 2.5 hours of nonstop performance. The spotlights followed him, creating a circle of white light that seemed to isolate him from everything else in the universe except the 90,000 people who hung on his every word, his every gesture. "I want to hear you sing," he said, and the simple words sent a jolt of electricity through the stadium that was almost visible in the way bodies straightened, hands clasped, faces turned upward toward the stage. "But not with me, not following my lead. I want to hear what's in your hearts when you think nobody's listening." The confusion that followed was palpable, a shifting in the seats, a murmuring that grew and faded like waves against the shore. People looked at their neighbors, uncertain what was being asked of them, uncertain whether this was part of the show or something spontaneous and unrehearsed. In the expensive seats close to the stage, executives and celebrities found themselves as lost as the teenagers in the upper decks, all of them united in their bewilderment and their desire to give Michael whatever he was asking for. "Sing what you want to sing," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength and clarity as the words found their rhythm. "Sing what you need to sing. Sing what this night means to you." He stepped back from the microphone stand, his hands spread wide in a gesture of invitation that encompassed the entire stadium, every section, every row, every individual heart beating in unison with the rhythm that seemed to pulse up from the earth itself. The silence that followed stretched so long that some people began to wonder if the sound system had failed, if the magic of the evening had somehow short-circuited in the face of this unprecedented request. Security guards shifted nervously at their posts, unsure whether this was part of the planned program or something that required their intervention. In the production booth high above the stadium floor, engineers hovered over their equipment, ready to troubleshoot problems that might not even exist. Then, from somewhere deep in the stadium's middle sections, a single voice began to sing. Not loudly, not with any attempt to draw attention to itself, but with the clear, pure intention of someone who had been moved beyond the boundaries of self-consciousness. The melody that rose from that anonymous throat was unmistakable, the opening notes of the song that had made Michael Jackson not just a star, but a cultural phenomenon, the song that had redefined what popular music could be and what it could make people feel. Other voices joined in, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, as the realization spread through the crowd that this was indeed what Michael wanted, what the moment demanded. The song was Thriller, but it was Thriller as no one had ever heard it before, sung not by a performer on a stage, but by 90,000 people who had discovered something in themselves they hadn't known existed until that precise moment under the New Jersey sky. The sound built slowly, organically, without any conductor or leader except the collective heartbeat that seemed to sync every person in that stadium to the same rhythm. Voices that had never sung outside of their showers found harmonies they hadn't known they possessed. Children's voices soared above the deeper tones of their parents, creating layers of sound that no recording studio could have engineered, no producer could have imagined. Michael stood transfixed at the center of the stage, his microphone forgotten in his hand, his usual precise choreography abandoned, as he simply listened to the song he had created being transformed into something entirely new by the people who had made it part of their lives. The expression on his face, magnified on the giant video screens, showed a man experiencing something beyond surprise, beyond gratitude, beyond any emotion for which there were adequate words. The singing grew stronger with each passing verse, voices finding each other across the stadium, creating spontaneous harmonies that sent chills down the spines of everyone present, including the performers on stage who had thought they had seen everything in their years of touring with the King of Pop. The band members found themselves setting down their instruments, adding their own voices to the chorus that seemed to make the very concrete foundations of the stadium vibrate with sympathetic resonance. As the chorus reached its crescendo, something extraordinary happened. The sound became so unified, so perfectly synchronized, that it transcended the individual voices from which it was composed and became something entirely other, something that seemed to originate not from 90,000 separate throats, but from some deeper source, some collective soul that had been waiting for exactly this moment to make itself known. Michael's reaction was immediate and visceral. His body began to move, not with the calculated precision of his usual choreography, but with the uninhibited response of someone overwhelmed by beauty, by connection, by the realization that the love he had been giving to his audiences was being reflected back to him, magnified beyond his wildest dreams. He spun, he leaped, he threw his head back and laughed with pure joy, his movements so spontaneous and authentic that they seemed to crack open something in the hearts of everyone watching. The stadium began to shake. Not metaphorically, not in the hyperbolic sense of concert reviews and fan magazines, but literally, physically, measurably shake. The engineering marvels of Giant Stadium, designed to withstand the forces of nature and the enthusiasm of sporting events, began to resonate with the frequency created by 90,000 voices singing in perfect unison, 90,000 pairs of feet moving to the same rhythm, 90,000 hearts beating in synchronization. Security guards felt the vibrations through their feet and looked nervously at each other, unsure whether this was dangerous or simply unprecedented. In the press box, journalists who had covered concerts for decades found themselves setting aside their notepads and simply experiencing something they knew they would spend the rest of their careers trying to adequately describe. The trembling traveled up through the steel and concrete, into the light towers, into the broadcasting equipment, creating a physical manifestation of the emotional earthquake that was occurring in the souls of everyone present. Michael felt the trembling through the stage floor and understood immediately what was happening. His face, still magnified on the video screens for all to see, showed a moment of recognition so profound that many in the audience later said they felt they were witnessing the exact instant when a performer transcended entertainment and became something approaching the sacred. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because moments like these remind us why Michael Jackson wasn't just an entertainer, but a bridge between hearts, a translator of the language that exists between souls when words aren't enough. He began to dance with abandon, his body interpreting the rhythm that was being created not just by the music, but by the collective movement of the crowd, the swaying and clapping and the subtle shifts of weight from foot to foot that 90,000 people make when they're completely absorbed in a shared experience. His dancing fed the energy of the singing, which in turn intensified the shaking of the stadium, creating a feedback loop of joy and connection that built on itself with each passing moment. The song continued, but had become something far beyond its original form. Voices improvised harmonies that shouldn't have worked but did, creating chord progressions that would have impressed conservatory professors, all emerging spontaneously from the collective musical intuition of people who had never met, who spoke different languages, who came from different worlds, but who had found, in that moment, the frequency on which all human hearts vibrate when they're completely open to beauty and connection. Michael pulled off his famous sequined glove, the one that had become as much a part of his identity as his voice or his moonwalk, and held it high above his head. The gesture was captured by every camera in the stadium, transmitted to television audiences around the world, but for those present, it was something far more intimate than a photo opportunity. It was a surrender, an offering, a recognition that this moment belonged not to him alone, but to everyone who was creating it through their voices, their presence, their willingness to trust in something larger than themselves. He threw the glove into the audience, not to any particular section or person, but with the same kind of faith that had guided the entire evening, trusting that it would land where it needed to land, that it would find its way to hands that would understand its significance. The glove arced through the spotlights, spinning slowly, catching and reflecting light as it traveled through the humid air, and when it disappeared into the crowd, the roar that erupted was so powerful that it temporarily drowned out even the singing. But the singing resumed, stronger now, as if the gift of the glove had given everyone permission to pour even more of themselves into the song. People were crying openly, tears streaming down faces that were also lit with smiles of pure joy. Strangers embraced strangers. Children sat on parents' shoulders with their hands raised toward the sky, and elderly couples who had attended the concert to accompany their grandchildren found themselves singing with voices they hadn't used in decades. The shaking of the stadium intensified, and now it was impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The entire structure was moving in rhythm with the music, with the crowd, with the heartbeat of something that had been born in that space and at that moment and would never be repeated or replicated. Engineers would later analyze the recordings and the structural data and conclude that Giant Stadium had experienced what could only be classified as a musical earthquake, a seismic event generated not by the movement of tectonic plates, but by the synchronized movement of human souls. Michael stood at the edge of the stage, his shirt now completely soaked with sweat, his hair wild from his uninhibited dancing, his face radiant with an expression that combined exhaustion and exhilaration in equal measure. He raised his arms above his head, not in triumph, but in a gesture of receiving, of acknowledging the gift that was being given to him by 90,000 people who had trusted him enough to reveal parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. The song built to its climax, and at the moment when the final chorus should have ended, something magical happened. Instead of fading away, the voices continued, improvising, extending, creating new verses and new harmonies, as if the song itself had become a living thing that refused to die. The singing went on, evolving and growing, becoming a wordless expression of gratitude and love and recognition that transcended the original lyrics and melody. Michael began to cry. The tears were visible on his face, magnified on the screens, streaming down his cheeks in silver tracks that caught the stage lights and threw them back to the audience in tiny sparkles of reflected emotion. He made no attempt to hide the tears, no gesture toward maintaining the professional composure that performers are supposed to maintain. Instead, he let his vulnerability show, let his overwhelming gratitude and amazement be seen by everyone. And in doing so, he gave permission for the thousands of others who were crying to cry without shame, to let their emotions flow as freely as the music that continued to fill the night air. The shaking of the stadium reached its peak, a rhythmic trembling that could be felt in bones and teeth and hearts, a physical manifestation of the spiritual earthquake that was occurring in the lives of everyone present. Light fixtures swayed gently, creating moving patterns of illumination across the crowd. The video screens vibrated slightly, causing the images to blur and dance in ways that somehow made them more beautiful, more alive. As the improvised finale finally began to fade, Michael walked slowly to the microphone, his movements deliberate and reverent, as if he were approaching an altar. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion, barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the stadium with perfect clarity. "Thank you," he said, and the two words contained more meaning than most people manage to pack into entire speeches. Thank you for showing me what music can be when it comes from the heart. Thank you for reminding me why we're all here. Thank you for being brave enough to sing with your whole souls. The applause that followed was different from any applause that had ever echoed through Giant Stadium. It wasn't the rhythmic clapping of appreciation for a performance well done. It was a sustained roar of recognition, of gratitude, of acknowledgement that everyone present had been part of creating something that would live in their memories forever, something that would change how they thought about music and connection and the possibility of transcendence in everyday life. Michael bowed deeply, not with the theatrical flourish of a performer acknowledging applause, but with the genuine humility of someone who had been profoundly moved by what he had witnessed and experienced. When he straightened, he looked out across the sea of faces, many still wet with tears, all still glowing with the joy of shared creation. And his smile was radiant with the understanding that he had just experienced one of the purest expressions of love that any performer could hope to receive. The concert continued for another hour, But everyone present knew that nothing that followed could match the transcendent beauty of those minutes when 90,000 voices had become one voice, when a stadium had shaken with the force of collective joy, when a glove thrown into a crowd had become a symbol of trust and connection that would outlive any of the individuals who had witnessed its flight through the humid New Jersey air. Years later, when people talked about that night, they struggled to find words adequate to the experience. They spoke of feeling connected to something larger than themselves, of discovering voices they hadn't known they possessed, of participating in a moment of pure creativity that had emerged spontaneously from the intersection of 90,000 individual hearts all beating in rhythm with the same impossible dream. The glove, meanwhile, had been caught by a teenage girl in section 214, row 15, seat 8, who clutched it to her chest as if it contained the secret to everything she had ever wondered about love and music, and the possibility of magic in a world that often seemed determined to convince her that magic wasn't real. She would keep that glove for the rest of her life, not as a trophy or a collector's item, but as a tangible reminder that she had once been part of something so beautiful that it had made a stadium shake, so powerful that it had moved the king of pop to tears, so perfect that no recording could capture it and no repetition could recreate it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because Michael Jackson's story is full of moments that remind us of the incredible power of human connection. And there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be told, stories of a man who gave everything to his art and received in return the kind of love that most people only dream of experiencing. 20 years later, Giant Stadium would be demolished to make way for a new venue. But before the wrecking balls arrived, workers found something unexpected in the concrete foundations. Embedded in the structure itself, they discovered tiny cracks that formed an intricate pattern radiating outward from the area directly beneath where the stage had been positioned that night in 1984. Engineers studying the pattern concluded that the cracks had been caused by sustained vibrations at a specific frequency, vibrations that had penetrated deep into the concrete and steel, leaving a permanent record of the night when 90,000 people sang so beautifully that they literally moved the earth beneath their feet. The concrete containing those cracks was saved before the demolition, cut into small pieces, and distributed to fans around the world who wanted to own a fragment of the foundation that had been transformed by the force of collective joy. Each piece was small, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know its story, but to those who held them, they were pieces of magic, fragments of a night when the impossible had happened and the king of pop had danced with abandonment while his glove flew through the air toward hands that were ready to catch not just a piece of fabric and sequins, but a piece of the pure love that had filled a stadium and made it shake with the rhythm of 90,000 hearts beating as one.